I kind of shifted my focus from trying to stop climate change to trying to adapt to it. And those are actually, especially when you're talking about organic farms, there's a lot of overlap between those two things.
Yeah.
But I think it is really still important to transition our systems from fossil fuels to renewable energy and from industrial agriculture to, more localized organic and regenerative forms of agriculture. But at the same time, I think there is a certain level of acceptance that, this is the world that we live in. And even if we halted climate emissions today, there would still be a certain level of climate change that is happening. And so being able to just accept that everything is changing and be able to adapt to it is paramount to be able to live and cope with the 21st.
Yeah. It's the Growing for Market podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Masha Vernik to the Growing for Market podcast. Masha is a graduate student at the University of Washington, and for her master's thesis, she interviewed vegetable farmers in Western Washington about seed selection for climate resilience. But in the process, she collected data about climate adaptation too. Masha has also worked on several farms in the Snoqualmie Valley, just east of Seattle, so she brings that perspective to her work too. So without further ado, welcome to the Growing for Market podcast, Masha.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk with you.
Yeah, well, this is obviously a important issue that everybody's dealing with. I'm really curious to hear about what. Well, I guess I know. I looked at your thesis, but I'm really curious to hear about it from you.
For sure. It is pretty long, so I take no offense if you didn't read all of it.
Yeah, it's 100. Yeah, for people, it's 100 pages long.
Totally.
I,
Yeah.
I did not read every single word, but I looked at the whole thing. There's a lot there, which is why I'm excited to talk about it.
For me as a researcher, it's important to make sure that what I learn doesn't just stay, in the thesis or even in a publication. I think it's pretty important to get the information to people who will actually use it. So I'm really hoping that this can be part of that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, especially I think there is a lot of actionable information in your thesis, and we're all trying to figure out what's going on with the weather. So, um, it's a very timely topic.
For sure.
So I know that you worked on several farms. Is that what led you to do your master's thesis on the impact of climate change on farms?
Kind of. I would say it all happened in tandem.
Mm-hmm.
The way that I even got into food systems and agriculture was through climate change.
Mm-hmm.
I, in college, had this really existential moment of what are we doing to the earth? What is it going to look like in 100 years? And that sort of led me to agriculture because I learned about how industrial agriculture contributes a lot to climate change, but also how alternative forms of agriculture like organic and regenerative sustainable can be part of the solution. And so that led me to exploring food systems in different ways. Of course, I was like, I need to actually work on a farm if I'm going to work in this field. And then it led me to a few other ways of engaging with the subject. I worked at a food advocacy legal nonprofit called FarmStand, now called FarmStand. I also am engaged with the Jewish Seed Project. I still do work with them regarding cultural seed keeping. And eventually my questions led me to going to grad school because asking questions is a natural way for me to engage with the world. So that's how I ended up in grad school, just exploring the same topic, but I would say from a different lens.
Okay, and yeah, and it seems like like seeds and varieties and things like that come up in your work a lot. How did you get interested in seeds?
Yeah. So I actually spent some time in Ecuador when I was in undergrad. I did a study abroad, which brought me to the rainforest. And I had this amazement with the biodiversity. I also got to spend some time with the Quechua indigenous community there and was really amazed with the profound knowledge that they have in sustaining the biodiversity.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember coming back to the States and looking at the supermarket aisles and being like, come on, like there's got to be more here. Where are the seeds? And eventually that led me to asking internally, what are my own relationships with seeds as a Jewish person? And we all have, I think, cultural relationships to seeds that can be explored, So that led me to my engagement with the Jewish Seed Project. I mean, I think what captivates me so much about them is that they're these tiny, minuscule little things that really are unassuming. It can be just like a little black dot, or whatever the seed looks like on the outside. And actually, it contains the code to life. Like
Hmm.
it can sprout and create a being that nourishes us and sustains us and gives us air to breathe. I think Stevie Wonder puts it really well. He has a quote in The Secret Life of Plants that goes, "I can't conceive the nucleus of all begins inside a tiny seed." That kind of sums up what's so amazing to me about seeds, as well as, they're containers of memory, of information, of knowledge and culture that can be
Hmm.
passed on from generation to generation. So I have this lens through which I'm seeing seeds. And I know that many of us know that seeds and genetic diversity are really important for the food system in general, and then especially when it comes to being resilient to climate change, right? We need genetic diversity in our food system to be able to handle what is climate change is throwing at us. Because if some things fail, we want other things to survive, right? And that's just how evolution works in general. And so I wanted to know, how does that actually play out on farms? Is this something farmers are thinking about and dealing with, especially in organic contexts?
Hmm.
Because I know that farmers have lots of other things to think about when they're picking their seeds, right? It's not just climate resilience. People are also thinking about what works well on their landscape for their soil. What will the market want? What will sell well? What will hold well? There's all of these factors to consider. My question was really, okay, how does climate change figure into all of that?
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's true. It's pretty miraculous that little tiny seed can grow into a 30-foot tall tomato plant, or an even bigger tree or whatever. Yeah. I mean, if you go back far enough, like we all have a lot of farmers in our backgrounds, right? And you figure they were all dealing with seeds, and whether they were selecting them specifically or just picking the ones that grew the best year after year, they were doing a certain kind of selection. And so obviously with if they were in a particular area, those seeds would have ended up adapted to that area. But with the weather changing around us, we obviously need to be thinking about this, of how to get varieties that are either resilient enough or adapted well enough to whatever is coming. So like, yeah, okay, I see that. I can see, yeah, seeds are fascinating. So when I was looking at your thesis, I noticed that Eli Wheat was one of the advisors on your thesis. He was on the pod a while back, and I didn't do his interview, but I really enjoyed listening to it. So it was fun to see his name pop up there. People who didn't hear that one should go back and check it out. He is a farmer, and he's also on staff there at the University of Washington, of course, which is how he became an advisor on your thesis. So that was fun. That was fun for me to see.
Well, yeah. Yeah. Eli's a teaching professor at UW. So he's inspiring constantly the next generation to become fascinated with agriculture and farming. But yeah, I really love Eli. He has been an amazing addition to my committee, really keeping my work grounded in farmers' needs and farmers' considerations.
Yeah. And were all the farms that you worked on there in Washington State?
Yeah, they have been.
Okay. Well, that's fun for me also, because I know you said at least some of the farms that you worked on were in the Snoqualmie Valley, and I realize now I think it was over 20 years ago. In 2004, I worked on Full Circle Farm, which is in Carnation, which is
Yeah.
easy to remember. Yeah, because it's from the Carnation Instant Breakfast. I don't even know. I mean, I guess Carnation used to be a big dairy town, and so that's actually what Carnation Instant Breakfast is named after. Like, apparently, like the group, they took the name of that town because that's where I don't know if it was a cooperative or whatever, but there's some connection between Carnation Instant Breakfast and the town of Carnation in Washington, where Circle Farm is, where my wife and I worked 20 years or so ago. I can't believe it, but I guess I'm that old now that things that seem like they were yesterday were 20 years ago. But that's a fun memory too, and it's definitely a cool area.
Yeah. Carnation Farms is one of the farms that's in the valley in the town of Carnation.
Hmm.
And they started the Carnation Milk brand. I don't know if
Hmm.
people remember that. It used to be pretty big.
Hmm.
They're they've been gone through a few ownership changes, but
Hmm.
now they're a leading farm doing a lot of really cool, they're a nonprofit farm doing a lot of cool work with regenerative agriculture. So yeah, they do awesome work.
Cool. Thank you. Okay. I didn't realize that connection. And do you know if, okay, so I just know it when I don't even know if the instant breakfast is still around. Do you know if Carnation instant breakfast is still a thing? Does that still
I'm not
exist?
sure.
Okay. Well, I guess that's probably, I'm not sure if I'm dating myself there. I remember when I was a kid, it was almost like a smoothie, or I don't know. It's one of those, it's like supposed to be like a whole meal in a cup kind of a thing. I'm not sure if it still exists, but that's, that's, uh, that's how I knew about Carnation when we got there.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool agriculture going on out in Western Washington in general. You got the Skagit Valley, and then where I worked has been the Snohomish Valley. And
Okay.
they have really, really fertile land because of flooding. So it's along the Snohomish River, and
Mm-hmm.
it floods almost every year. And with the flooding brings a lot of really rich nutrients. And so the farmers there are really, they're happy that there's such rich soil.
Yeah.
But this year, actually, there was really historic flooding that was, in excess and or much more than people have been used to contending with. And it
Yeah.
was pretty hard to deal with for some of the farmers out there, including one of the farms that I worked on, it's called Local Roots Farm.
Mm-hmm.
They sell a lot to restaurants and they also have a CSA. Their specialty is radicchio. So they were one of the earlier farm to table restaurants in the Seattle area and started selling to all these high-end restaurants and started bringing radicchio from Italy. They actually did a few trips to Italy to bring radicchio seed, and there's a lot of really interesting varieties that they grow to sell to those restaurants, but then also through their CSA. Oh, and now they have a farm store, which is really awesome as well.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, yeah. It's not that long ago. There was that big atmospheric river. I know that there was a lot of flooding up in Washington State. So I do wonder how they're doing now. And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. This episode is brought to you by Tend, the all-in-one AI-powered farm management platform trusted by modern growers. Whether you're growing vegetables, flowers, or fruit, or managing a nursery, greenhouse, or vineyard, you know how much time gets lost in planning, tracking, and staying organized. Tend helps you cut through the busy work so you can focus on growing and selling what matters. With Tend, you can plan your crops, assign and track tasks, manage inventory, and handle your sales and accounting all in one smart, easy to use platform. Whether you run a 1 acre farm or manage a large operation, Tend adapts to your scale and style, supporting everything from manual labor to fully mechanized workflows. Try it for free at tend.com. No credit card required. That's TEND.com. Streamline your season and grow with confidence.
Hey, it's Lindsay from Grown By. There are a lot of farm sales platforms out there, but there's only one that's cooperatively owned by farmers. And that's Grown By, your all-in-one solution to simplify farm sales. I'm proud and excited to share 2 new features now available on top of the tools you already know and love. Number 1, our customizable CSA box builder. It allows your customers to simply say what they'd like in their share, and Grown By matches their preferences with your weekly harvest. Number 2, our new wholesale-only marketplace. Developed with the Culinary Institute of America, it makes your life easier with a dedicated shop for your wholesale customers. No more texting those chefs. Combining retail and wholesale inventories and records. And, drumroll, automatic payments on due dates. No more chasing down late payments. These new features sit alongside our popular online sales and traditional subscription CSA tools, making it easier than ever to manage your farm's business. As you start to get ready for next season, we'd love to hear from you and see if our cooperative can be a partner in growing your farm. Visit us at grownby.com. That's GROWNBY.com.
A well-built high tunnel is one of the smartest investments a small farm can make. It protects your crops, extends your season, and keeps income rolling in even through winter. Nifty Hoops builds complete Gothic high tunnels that are easy to install and built to last. Their easy, bolt-together construction makes setup straightforward and efficient, whether it's a small backyard hoop house or a dozen large production-scale high tunnels. especially through their community build option, where professional builders work alongside your crew, family, or neighbors to build each structure, usually in a single day. Most growers go with Nifty's full setup: steel framed end walls, roll up sides, baseboards, double plastic with inflation, automated vents, and real doors, all priced to make the best choice the easy one. Nifty is a small crew out of Michigan using US steel and working hands on with growers across the country. They'll help evaluate your site, handle NRCS paperwork, and if they're building with you, they'll even float your cost share until after the build. Visit niftyhoops.com to learn more. Farm more seasons, grow more food. Nifty Hoops. Okay, so I looked at your thesis. I confess I didn't read every single word. Like we said, it's 100 pages long. There's a lot there. Can you summarize what you were looking to learn with this project?
Definitely. I was really curious to learn how farmers are thinking about seeds in the context of climate change, specifically organic vegetable farmers, many of whom were market growers, but not all of them in Western Washington, because in academia, you have to be really specific.
Mm-hmm.
So many of the people who are listening probably know about this need for genetic diversity to handle the impacts of climate change. But at the same time, farmers have lots of other considerations when they're thinking about what to grow, right? It's not just climate resilience. You're also thinking about your markets. You're thinking about your preferences. You're thinking about what is good for the land and the soil that you're growing on. So I was really curious, how is this actually playing out on farmers' fields?
Yeah.
The question of seeds in the context of climate change and thinking about seeds as a tool of adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
And I can kind of summarize what I found in a few sentences. What I found is that crop diversity and seed diversity are not necessarily being being found on organic vegetable farms because of resilience. I would actually say that resilience to climate change is a feature of this kind of diversified organic vegetable farming.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean by that is that a lot of the diversity that we're seeing is more so being driven by needing to satisfy your market, whether that's through CSAs, or farmers market, or even if you're selling through wholesale. That motivates a baseline level of diversity, which then does help farms be resilient, even if climate resilience wasn't necessarily the motivation behind that diversity.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And
Yeah.
there's a lot there. So that's the whole rest of the conversation. But can you, before we move on with that, can you tell us what your methodology was? Like how did you go about investigating this?
Yeah, so I did interviews with farmers in Western Washington. I did 28 interviews. Each of the farmers grew vegetables and identified as being organic. Not every single of the farmers was certified. I wanted
Mm-hmm.
to have an expansive definition of organic that
Yeah.
where you didn't have to be certified. So as long as people were using organic practices, I interviewed them.
Yeah.
So I asked questions around, why are you picking the seeds that you're picking? Right? So like what crops are you growing? Why are you growing them? Secondly, I asked about how you're experiencing climate change and also how you're adapting.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, I asked farmers to put them together and ask, okay, are these two processes of picking seeds and adapting to climate change, are you thinking about them together? Are they related processes?
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of how I went about doing the interviews. And of course, I also got some background information, just what are you growing? What kind of farm are you on? Things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then all those interviews were recorded. Then I went in and did a process called coding. So, first of all, you have to create transcripts from the interviews. You're probably familiar with that as a podcaster. You probably have transcripts. And then I go through in a software called NVivo and I highlight different codes or themes that show up.
Huh?
And those are just things that like emerge naturally from the interviews, patterns that I started seeing in the data. And then through that, I started putting together a written summary or synthesis of what I was finding in the codes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. And that's one of the things that made me really interested to talk with you, because you talk to so many different people. I realize there's certain people like consultants, like ag consultants or something like that, bring a different perspective. because they talk to so many people, and I figured, that's one really interesting thing that you did. You just talked to so many farmers. It really probably gave you a sense of sort of like how it's playing out for the trend, for multiple.
Definitely, yeah, and there was a cool range, in sizes. So the
Mhm.
smallest farmer I interviewed was farming on a quarter acre, and the
Mhm.
biggest farm was farming on 820 acres. So those are pretty different scales, right?
Yeah,
So there
pretty
was
different.
yeah, so there was quite a decent amount of variety in people's farming approaches, even though they all were organic vegetable farmers in Western Washington.
Mhm.
Also, half of them, it just so happened that half were certified organic and half weren't certified organic, so I got a balance of organic perspectives there as well.
Yeah. Well, that probably tracks pretty well with the GFM audience, I'm guessing, because it's like it's the magazine isn't specifically for organic farmers. We like focus, I guess we say, on local people who sell at local markets, but it does seem like the most of the people that I talk to from the GFM audience, if they're not certified organic, they're sort of, a lot of them are like organic by default, or like organic but not certified, or people have different ways of calling that. So um okay, so is there anything you can say from your research about how climate change is playing out there in the Pacific Northwest in temperature, precipitation, or other metrics?
Definitely. So I'll say the number one impact that I heard was an impact that is not specific to Western Washington or even to the States.
Mm-hmm.
And that is unpredictability.
Yeah.
So that is something that farmers all over the world are dealing with, regardless of the ecological region that you find yourself in. People are not able to rely on the weather patterns that were used to be more or less stable,
Mm-hmm.
and of course, there's natural variation in climates, but it's becoming much, much more now. And the way that's playing out in the Pacific Northwest, specifically, at least on the western side of the Cascades Mountains, is that people are not able to rely on spring wetness, right? So sometimes spring can be really wet and sometimes it can be really dry.
Mm-hmm.
And that variation is becoming more now, is
Mm-hmm.
increasing. So that makes it really hard to know when you're going to be able to get things in the ground in spring, because you
Mm-hmm.
need to wait until it's relatively dry. And that means that it's hard for people to do their crop planning. It's hard for people to know, when they're going to be able to start selling. And that can be really hard, especially when you get into the later spring months when, you already haven't been selling in winter. For those who
Mm-hmm.
aren't selling in winter, others are doing winter selling.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say unpredictability is number one. Secondly is wildfires. So people talked a lot about wildfire smoke. That's something that is definitely occurring more in the Pacific Northwest and the West Coast of the US in general because of climate change. And this one is really mentally hard for the farmers there because I don't know if, you've ever been in a really smoky setting, but it just feels apocalyptic. Like
Yeah, it
the
does.
sky is hazy. It's like you're like, "Oh my gosh, it's scary."
Yeah.
And yeah, but farmers are having to balance their health and safety and workers' health and safety with their need to keep harvesting and keep their business going. So that's really hard and taking a big mental toll.
Yeah.
I'll also say flooding. Uh, that's a big one, and I talked about this a little bit, but in some of the valleys in Western Washington, flooding is a naturally occurring event.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're seeing is that because of increases in wintertime precipitation, flooding is becoming not necessarily every year, but the trend that we're seeing is that floods can be getting worse.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw that December 2025, really, really intense flooding that definitely hit a lot of the farmers
Yeah.
in Western Washington. And I did do these interviews before that round of flooding, so I will just, you know, add that as a disclaimer.
Yeah, yeah. That's a more recent example. So yeah, I mean that's a very recent example of that, right? Because we're sitting here early January 2026, and there was just a big flooding event
For
in
sure.
Washington.
Yeah, and I think that affects farmers differently. It kind of depends on For example, where your wash and pack station is. The farm that I worked on, Local Roots, were able to build a tractor pad that was pretty high, where they put all of their tractors in anticipation of a really big flood.
Hmm.
But maybe some farmers who don't have that kind of capital weren't able to do that, or haven't been able to move their wash and pack stations outside of a flood zone, uh, right?
Yeah.
So it really kind of depends, your sensitivity to it depends on your situation and what kind of infrastructure you have,
Yeah.
as well as like if you have things currently in the ground, because if you once a flood waters come in, you're not allowed to sell anything that's in the ground except for garlic, like except for root vegetables.
Yeah.
But any leafy greens, you're not allowed to sell those because of health and safety regulations. So that, if you were relying on produce that to sell it through the winter, that usually wouldn't have been hit by the floods, but because the floods were so big this year did get hit, then that could also, be hard for farmers.
Yeah. Yeah. That could wipe you out. And that's because you never know what's in floodwater. Like there could be all kinds of contaminants and things, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's good to know. We're up here in the opposite corner of the country. My farm's in Maine. And so we've been up here for almost 20 years. So I'm experiencing climate change in a very northeastern perspective, but it's good to know that it's similar in some ways because I think if you had asked me a decade ago what I thought climate change would be like, I thought it would be just like it was then, but a little warmer, right? And really the most pervasive thing here has been just the unpredictability, It's like
Exactly.
some it's it makes me realize how much I took predictability of weather for granted. Farmers have all these little tips of like plant corn when the oak leaves are the size of a squirrel's ear and like all these things that are based on like years and years and years of fairly predictable weather cycles. And so now it's like, yeah, I mean, overall it's warmer here in the Northeast, but it's just like it's also unpredictable. It's hard to say. Some years now we have a really cold, wet spring. Some years it warms up really quickly. So yeah, just makes it really hard to plan when the
Ab-
weather's not predictable.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that people in urban areas, or at least people even in rural areas who don't rely on the land for their livelihoods,
Hmm.
maybe that passes them by, because people everywhere will feel an extreme if it's really really hot or really really cold, or if there's like a strong extreme in either direction, people feel that. But as last year was a rainy spring and this year was a dry spring, things like that might not feel as prevalent or come as big of a shock to people who don't depend on the land for their livelihoods.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something that like farmers really feel, and farmers, I think, and farm workers are on the front lines of when it comes to climate change.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I think our audience is probably one of the more impacted by climate change because, yeah, you're right. If you work in an office, then the weather every day is whatever temperature it is in the office. Whereas I think what you're saying is that there are changes that are small enough that other people might not notice them, but as a farmer, you will because you're making all these decisions about when to plant or not plant and all these kinds of things based on the weather, which is now hard to predict.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll also add to, when we're talking about climate change and how it's unfolding in the Pacific Northwest, a few other things people mentioned to me were extreme cold, shifting pests and diseases. So climate change is actually altering pest ranges, and people are talking about seeing new pests that they hadn't seen before.
Hmm.
Of course, heat waves is a really big one. People are seeing heat waves come that can be really devastating as well. And then kind of depending on what you're growing, because some people also said, hey, I'm trying to grow tropical crops because they're culturally relevant to me, and actually they really love the heat. Whereas others are saying, yeah, my spinach did not like that that heat wave, right? And then I will say there are some potentially good impacts of climate change. I won't necessarily say that it like outweighs all the bad, but there are, I would say, opportunities that people are taking advantage of, which is that it does extend the season. And so people are seeing longer shoulder seasons and sun in the Pacific North, in the Western Washington, going into potentially late October, depending on the year, when before things were getting rainy and cold a lot earlier than that.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Yeah, that's interesting you mentioned that because one of the things that I remember from working in Carnation was that it's that was far enough west. I forget if Carnation is like half an hour or 45 minutes east of Seattle, but like it's pretty close to Seattle. You might know
Yeah.
better, but whatever. Basically, east of Seattle, the farm that we worked for there, they did a CSA and they would buy certain items in partially because they were too cold to really grow the vining fruiting crops like tomatoes and peppers and stuff like that. Or maybe not, like it wasn't really economically viable, right? And what they always talked about was west of the Cascades or east of the Cascades. And so they grew greens like crazy, and they sourced their tomatoes and peppers from a farm east of the Cascades. And so it makes me wonder if they're trying to grow tomatoes and peppers and stuff like that now. It's been 20 years since I've been there. The climate is probably different than when I
Yeah.
was there. So I
I
don't know.
I think most of the farms I interviewed do grow tomatoes and
Hmm.
peppers.
Hmm.
Definitely in greenhouses, although field tomatoes and peppers are one of those experimental ways of growing things that people are starting to try. I wouldn't say it's the norm out there, but people are experimenting with growing tomatoes, peppers, and also eggplant out in the field outside of greenhouses.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. Well, actually, so was there any broad consensus in what the farmers you interviewed told you about adapting to climate change, or any anecdotes that stand out for that matter? Yeah. What are people saying about how that they're dealing with it?
Yeah, I would say that what really stood out to me was the importance of being flexible.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of farmers told me stories where that kind of emerged as a theme,
Mm-hmm.
where people are being flexible with their cropping and with what they're planting. So a really good example of this is one farmer who offers their CSAs 3 out of every 4 weeks. And that off week is they can be flexible with where they put that, right? At the beginning of the season, they tell their CSA customers, hey, we're going to only offer this 3 out of every 4 weeks, and we're going to let you know when the off week will be. And so what that does is it'll gives them built-in flexibility to say, hey, there's a wildfire. We're not going to be harvesting right now. And we don't feel that pressure to harvest because we can just say, hey, this is an off week for us.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like one way to build in flexibility into your cropping and your harvesting plan to help deal with the impacts of climate change.
That makes sense. I've never heard of a CSA model like that, but that's interesting. I bet that'll
Yeah,
appeal to some people.
totally. Yeah. Another example of building in flexibility is by overseeding in the early season. So
Mm-hmm.
what this farmer talked about is growing different kinds of crops, like for example, seeding tomatoes and zucchini and spinach, right?
Mm-hmm.
And keeping them in the greenhouse. Which is interesting because usually I feel like mostly I've heard of spinach being planted in the ground, but they, for some reason, did it in the greenhouse. So, anyway, what they'll do is in the spring, once you start being able to tell if it's going to be wet or if it's going to be dry, if it's going to be warm or cold, then you just decide what goes into the ground and what will get thrown away. And of course, that does waste some time in the seed room, but
Mm-hmm.
you have a bit of insurance because you know that you've seeded all these things and at least one of them is going to be able to handle what the weather is going to throw at you.
Yeah, hedging your bets.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So you're hedging your bets. And that's also a concept in ecology, in the idea of resilience, which is something called response diversity. And that is the idea that ecosystems are more resilient when you have organisms that have different responses to stressors. So that can be really helpful when you're thinking about crop diversity. You want to grow crops that will all have different responses to the weather, and whether, if it's really, really hot, maybe the spinach won't like it, but hey, the eggplant is going to like it.
Uh-huh.
And so, yeah, in that way, you're hedging your bets and you're increasing your diversity of things that are going to have different responses to the climate or to the weather,
Yeah.
rather.
Okay. So maybe they're planting crops like summer crops earlier than they used to, or fall crops earlier, just in case it warms up early or cools down early. Those then at least if we can't predict those crops, there'll be something there that's happy. Is that
Yeah,
kind of thing?
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And you can also start seeding in the greenhouse, and then you don't necessarily waste field space, right? Like the whole point is that if you seed a lot of things early on in the greenhouse, even if you know you won't use all of them,
Mm-hmm.
then by the time it comes to plant, you'll kind of have an idea of if what the spring conditions will be like, that you'll be able to make that call and put things in the ground that at least based on forecasting will be able to fare pretty well.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's a good strategy, which people can obviously use anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. But so I think that the theme through both of those is that you're just trying to build in flexibility into your cropping plan. And
Yeah.
that looks different people that can look many, many different ways. But
Hmm.
building in that flexibility, like basically having insurance crops or having extra weeks where that you'll be able to take a week off, that can go a really long way. Another way that you can do this is to build storage capacity. Of course, that requires a little bit more infrastructure and capital to be able to build that. But if you have more storage capacity, then if there's going to be a heat wave, you'll be able to harvest things quickly in advance of the heat wave and keep them in storage. So yeah, I would say that's the theme that keeps emerging, is having systems where you're able to build flexibility into your cropping plan and your harvest plan.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, of course, it all takes money and planning, but I guess it's better than losing everything.
Exactly, yeah. And I think it also requires deviating from the plan, right? And having a plan that's like flexible and nimble, as opposed to a plan that's really, really set and like, this is going to be this week, this is going to be this week, and being overly rigid with that,
Hmm.
um, even if the conditions are showing otherwise. And I do think that's something that farmers have always done and naturally do. But if you are a little bit more proactive earlier in the season around like, okay, these are our backup crops, or this is our plan B. If, so and so happens, this is how we can build in flexibility. Then I think that can go a long way when it comes to adapting to climate change.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Just having the mindset, realizing like, okay, we're going to need to have to be flexible and resilient here is important to have that mindset. You had very specific definitions in your paper. So yeah, tell us about the way you are using the word resilience.
For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. So resilience, as defined by the socio-ecological literature, which is basically people who are thinking about social systems and ecological systems as being very interconnected, which I think all farmers will really understand and empathize with. So it defines resilience as a system that will retain the same structure and function following a disturbance, right? So a farm is still operating as a farm after there was like a heat wave, right?
Uh-huh.
A system that has the capacity to self-organize. So farmers can like interact with each other and kind of organize themselves, or, farm workers can organize themselves when there's an extreme event. That would
Uh-huh.
be an example of resilience.
Uh-huh.
And also the capacity to learn. That's really, really key. That things are affecting you in a certain way. Let's say there's, again, a big heat wave, and you're learning that, hey, these crops fared well actually under the heat wave, even though we didn't really expect them to. You learn that and you can apply those learnings in future years.
Uh-huh.
So the capacity to learn and adapt from those learnings is a really, really critical element of resilience.
Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
didn't make that up. That's like, there's research and literature that offered those definitions.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. You could say like, okay, you think about what kind of disruptions your farm might encounter in a given year and say like, okay, how can we make sure that our farm continues to be a farm given what we think may come?
Yeah. But it could be in a different way. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to stay as a farm in the exact same way.
Right.
Like, maybe you start growing different things, or maybe your market channels shift, but you're still growing food.
Oh, I was just going to ask you on that tip, did you talk to any people who are growing brand new crops, like new to them? I mean, I get like, like yeah, like maybe they didn't have the heat before and now they're growing more heat loving crops, or are they just adding more diversity to what they're already growing?
So I would say that the answer that was consistent across all of the interviews was that it was more about the process than
Mm,
necessarily what they're growing.
okay.
People are experimenting, right? They have their new crops that they're experimenting with, or new ways of growing familiar crops, or even new timings of familiar crops. So, for example, growing tomatoes in the field, experimenting with that, or growing sweet corn, planting that in July and seeing if it'll mature by the time the season ends. And people are experimenting with these things. They're kind of doing it on the side, right? So they have the crops that they're growing that are tried and true, that they
Mm-hmm.
know that they grow in this specific way. And that maybe accounts for 80-90% of the operation. But then there's a little part of the operation that's also experimental. That could be new crops. So, for example, people are talking about growing okra and sorghum, and sweet potatoes is another big one that people are experimenting with.
Mm-hmm.
I also heard grapes, which is really the Eastern Washington domain because there's a wine industry out there and
Yeah.
everything. People are experimenting with it on the west side of the Cascades as well. So people are experimenting with these new crops, or like I said, different plantings of familiar crops or different ways of growing them. That experiment sometimes fails, but sometimes it succeeds. So when it succeeds, then you incorporate it again the next year.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then eventually maybe the experiment becomes the tried and true. And then, you're experimenting with other things down the line.
Yeah.
And so going back to the definition of resilience when it comes to learning and adapting, applying your learnings when you're adapting to change,
Mm-hmm.
that is a really critical component. And we can actually see that playing out on farms when they have this really experimental approach to what you're growing
Mm-hmm.
and how.
All right. Did you get a sense from the growers that you were talking to, sort of like how they felt about all this? I'm thinking like, is it a waste of a lot of time? Are they spending a lot of time and energy planting crops just to hedge their bets? And th- then like some of them aren't coming off, but it's better to have that diverse group, and some of them will come off and some of them won't. Or is it just like a different version of what farmers have always been doing? Did you get any sense for that? Kind of like, I guess, like, it's sort of like, how's it going? Like, are growers feeling successful about it, or is it like a huge pain in the butt about what they got to do?
I think that this experimental approach, it definitely helps with climate change, but I also think it's driven by markets.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same thing, you also want to experiment with, okay, maybe my market is going to like this variety of radicchio, or maybe they're going to like this hot pepper, and we're just going to try it out. So I do think part of it is like things that people have been doing anyway. But on the flip side, there is definitely a cost to too much diversity, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
every new crop plan. You need to know, and also knowledge. Like you need to know how it grows. You need to know what are the signs when it's ready to harvest. You need to figure out how to store it correctly. And so I think having too much diversity also has its costs. And I
Mm-hmm.
did talk to a lot of farmers who are like, I do want to streamline our growing process. But at the same time, they're streamlining to what they still describe as a pretty high level of diversity.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of culminates in a strategy, what I termed specialized diversification.
Okay.
Yeah, so let me break that down. So that's basically this phenomenon where people are growing high levels of diversity. They're growing lots of different crops and oftentimes lots of varieties within those crops. And that helps them satisfy their markets, because if you're growing for a CSA, you can't have two crops.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're selling at a farmer's market, you can't have two crops. Conversely, if you're selling wholesale and you do specialize in crops, for example, if you're growing potatoes, you can't have one variety of potato. You need a couple varieties, one that's quick maturing, one that stores longer, right? So you do need, if you're growing organically, you need a high level of baseline diversity. But at the same time, there are costs to that diversity because of all of the extra things that you need to do for each additional crop, and all the learnings that you need to do. So people are kind of trying to streamline. Um, and at the same time, they also need to specialize. And by that, I mean, they need to find their niche crops.
Mm-hmm.
They're crops that they're really, really good at doing that are going to separate them from the other organic farms in the valley or
Mm-hmm.
in the region. So for some people, that could be culturally relevant crops. Like some people are growing sorghum or Asian greens, for example. Other farmers might specialize in having the earliest cucumbers. Like I get the earliest cucumbers and nobody has cucumbers at the farmer's market in May, but I do, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
They find their things that they specialize in. But that specialization, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's their whole operation. That's just what they're known for. Like for example, local roots, like I mentioned, the farm that I worked on in the Snohomish Valley, they're really, really good at radicchio.
Mm-hmm.
And they have all these forms of radicchio, but they also have lots of other things. Or another farm that I worked on, Bumblebee Farm, which is a newer one in the area. They really cater to Asian diasporic seeds, so they're growing a lot of things for Asian customers.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not all that they're growing. They also have more kitchen staple crops for at least for what American customers or American audiences are like used to.
Mm-hmm.
So you still have this like you're specializing in these things, but within the context of a lot of diversity to satisfy the markets. So that's the strategy of specialized diversification. Yeah.
I feel like at least our audience, like I think most direct market farmers, it's like most direct market farmers can't get away with growing just one crop anyway. So I feel like most farmers in our audience probably already speak diversity at least a little bit. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not going to blow their minds to be like, I have to grow more than one crop. Like they may have to do more of that. Or like you said, maybe even like more varieties of a particular crop to spread the risk a little bit. But at least, I feel like just by definition, most local farmers aren't growing their crop in the like best place to grow it. You know what I mean? Like most, like I don't know, the Salinas Valley in California might be the best place to grow lettuce. Most of our subscribers and listeners not in the Salinas Valley, but they're all probably still trying to grow lettuce. So at least I feel like what you're talking about doing is maybe just a further diversification of what growers are already doing, because I think that's probably what people are going to have to do. It does make me wonder, and I don't think anybody has an answer to this question, but let me know if you think you do. But yeah, like I wonder sometimes whether our weather, the weather's so weird right now because we're in a state of flux, like going from what used to be a settled regular patterns of weather to just to a new normal. Like are we in the in between the old normal and the new normal, or are we just is everything just changing and it's going to be weird? It's just going to keep being like, are we headed anywhere settled, or are we just in for like weather weirdness for the rest of our lives? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't
Well,
know
I'm
if
not.
anybody knows.
Yeah. I'm not a climate scientist. I do have some friends studying climate science, but from my understanding, the temperature is going to keep rising
Mm-hmm.
until we stop doing emissions.
Yeah.
And until that happens, like until there's kind of a stable equilibrium in terms of temperature, I do think things are going to become more chaotic, right? But the cool thing about being human is that also we can learn, right? So we can adapt our systems to the chaos. And I think farmers are people who understand that innately because of I think there's natural chaos in nature, but I think being able to adapt our systems even more is what it's going to take to be able to, live in this era that we're living in.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true, and I do think of farmers as master improvisers, and there's always a certain amount of unpredictability in the weather, and pests, and there's vagaries that no two seasons go down exactly the same, but it feels like especially on the weather side of things, season to season is getting more and more different. And so I mean, I think that's what this whole conversation is around, is like we have to expect that now. We almost have to expect weird weather, and so that's why the strategies that you're talking about are so important.
Exactly. Got to expect the unexpected. The only constant is change.
Yeah. Yes, more unfortunately more it does look like basically for the foreseeable future, because that's a good point, is that we are continuing to put more and more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which of course is what drives climate change. So yeah, that's a good point. As long as we keep driving it, it's going to keep changing. So unfortunately I do not see an end in sight at this point, but I guess that, yeah, we gotta roll with it until then.
Yeah. I
Uh,
kind of shifted my focus from trying to stop climate change to trying to adapt to it. And those are actually, especially when you're talking about organic farms, there's a lot of overlap between those two things.
yeah.
But I think it is really still important to transition our systems from fossil fuels to renewable energy and from industrial agriculture to, more localized organic and regenerative forms of agriculture. But at the same time, I think there is a certain level of acceptance that, this is the world that we live in. And even if we halted climate emissions today, there would still be a certain level of climate change that is happening. And so being able to just accept that everything is changing and be able to adapt to it is paramount to be able to live and cope with the 21st century.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So. And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. Farmers who partnered with Farmhand grew an average of 63% this year because it's more than software. Farmhand acts as your business coach and assistant, helping you sell out, save time, and grow smarter. From marketing to fulfillment to customer support, Farmhand pulls real data from what's worked and what hasn't for other farms and turns it into websites that convert, campaigns that sell, and fulfillment systems that give you your time back. Curious what that looks like? Meet the founder, Ari, at farmhand.partners/GFM and see the same insights and support the fastest growing farms rely on every week. That's farmhand.partners/GFM. Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or vegetables for your family, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment for a harvest you can count on. Rimmel greenhouses are strong, durable, and easy to assemble, offering the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Rimmel greenhouses are proudly built right here in America and shipped to anywhere in the U.S. With technical sales staff members located across the country, many with growing experience, the Rimmel Greenhouse's team of experts will serve as your trusted partner every step of the way to ensure that you get exceptional value from your greenhouse investment. Visit Rimmel.com to get a quote today. So, you got your soil tested, or you need your soil tested. It's time to contact Ohio Earth Food. Since 1972, they have been growers' trusted source for organic soil amendments to apply before you plant to prevent those deficiency symptoms that limit production. Their knowledgeable staff have all been a part of certified organic operations and can help you choose the best products for your soil and deliver or ship them right to your farm. With locations in Northwest Ohio and just north of Madison, Wisconsin, Ohio Earth Food wants to be your partner for organic inputs. Don't count on luck this year. Start your seeds in the Seed Catapult potting soil and put their Revita fertilizers in your beds, and rest assured that your plants will have all the nutrients, stimulants, and energy for whatever comes their way. Feed your soil and let your soil feed the plants. Visit them at ohioearthfood.com. So, yeah, okay, so I know you're really into seeds. Can you share more about where farmers are sourcing their seeds from and what different kinds of seed sources can offer in terms of climate resilience?
Totally. So I would say that the farmers that I talk to source their seeds from what I would call three broad categories, but it's also like a spectrum in terms of their seed sourcing.
Uh-huh.
So the first one I would say is probably providing the bulk of people's seeds, and that's your Johnny's, Territorial. I want to say big seed companies, but they're not actually that big compared to like the mega seed companies. In the organic world, let's call them big
Yeah.
organic seed companies.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're really like mid-size, they're not huge. And what, for example, Johnny's can offer, which I think is really amazing what they've done, is they can offer a lot of high quality seed, especially organic seed, that is affordable and at scale, right? You can order high quantities of them. And that's really important to anybody's operation. And then, in the context of climate change, you need those tried and trues. You need those kind of reliable seeds. But on the flip side, because they're operating at a certain scale, what they can't offer really is transparency. So people don't know where the seeds that they're buying are coming from. And that can be hard because, right, if you want to buy things from your bioregion, or even if you want to buy things from a slightly warmer bioregion, or a bioregion that is naturally experiences what you are now experiencing because of climate change, it might be hard to do that because you just don't know where the seeds are coming from. The second category, I would call them bioregional seed companies. So the Pacific Northwest has a lot of these companies, and I think people consider themselves really lucky to be living in the Pacific Northwest where we have that abundance. We have like Uprising Seed, Saltwater Seed, Adaptive Seed, like all these right? Adapt. They're in Oregon. So they
Yeah.
are doing really, really amazing work. And what they offer is a lot of really interesting like niche seeds that maybe you wouldn't find in a Johnny's catalog.
Uh-huh.
And that might be bringing in those niche customers, or, this is the seed that we can offer that other people don't,
Mm-hmm.
when farmers are figuring out their specializing in.
Yeah.
And then, of course, also what these bioregional seed companies offer is transparency. They're saying, hey, this is all Pacific Northwest grown. So you can know that your seed that you're buying is going to do well in this climate because it's adapted to here. So that's really, really valuable.
Yeah.
And then I would say the next level, and of course, there are kind of seed operations that fall in between these.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of the next trend is just seed saving and a lot of like community seed saving efforts.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times these revolve around cultural seeds. So if you're trying to find seeds that are for your specific cultural group. Yeah. And then I would say the third category is more community seed saving efforts.
Uh-huh.
So these are people who are sharing seeds amongst themselves. Sometimes there's like a network associated with it. And people oftentimes are trying to adapt culturally relevant seeds that are from other bioregions to their bioregion.
Mm-hmm.
And what this does, the pro of this is that not only are you adapting to seeds to your region, but you're also building connections with other farmers and with other seed growers. And that can be really important. Like, for example, during COVID, a lot of people relied on just, sharing seed the old fashioned way
Uh-huh.
in order to get their seed. So
Yeah.
it's really important to maintain those networks, especially when things hit the fan, when our systems pause or break down, you want to have those relationships and those networks. So that's really important. But then,
Yeah.
of course, the flip side is that both these community seed saving efforts, as well as a lot of times the regional seed companies, it's hard to get the quantity that you need at a price that you can afford.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, of course, the flip side. That's probably not going to be the backbone of your operation, but it does offer a lot of really important climate benefits when it comes to adapting to climate change.
Yeah.
So I think what's really key is that we need a seed system for catering towards organic farmers that combines all of these different forms of growing and sharing seed.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually a really nice little tie-in because within the past few weeks we had Adaptive Seeds on the podcast, which, as you mentioned, they're in Oregon breeding regionally adapted varieties. And then we just had Commonwealth Seeds on also, who are in Virginia, trying to breed regionally adapted seeds for the South and Southeast. And so, we don't really do themes on this podcast other than trying to be timely for whatever farmers are doing. But we are kind of thinking like, well, people are probably looking at their seed catalogs right now. This is a good time of year to talk about seeds. And I do think that's one of the most exciting trends that I've seen is I don't know, I wanted to say the rise of the regionally adapted seed companies. That might be like over dramatizing it, but I do feel like there's more regionally adapted seed companies than there were, say, 20 years ago, and they seem to be doing more and more. So I think that's very exciting as far as hopefully as if these companies are doing selections in their bioregions, that as the weather changes, that they'll be breeding varieties that work with the weather as the weather changes around us. So
100%.
nice tie in there. We didn't even talk about that.
Yeah, no, they're doing awesome work. Awesome work.
Yeah.
Yeah, as a gardener, I don't have a whole lot of land, but when I buy seeds for my garden, I always love looking through their seed catalogs because they're really, really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, they
Yeah,
are cool. Can you share about organic seed and why some farmers you talked with were particularly motivated to buy organic seed?
for sure. Yeah. So this is interesting because half of the farmers were certified organic, right? So, and half of them weren't. But I found that even though both groups are subject to different rules about organic seed, they actually had similar motivations for buying it. So, farmers who are certified organic have this rule where they have to buy organic seed unless they can't find it, right? There's like an exemption to this rule. So, if you prove to your certifier that you looked for the seed that you need and you couldn't find it in organic, then you don't need it. Probably, I'm sure people listening to this already know that. Um, so but despite that, despite like certified farmers being subject to that rule and non-certified farmers not being subject to I found that there was still a lot of similarities in why people are buying organic seed. And that has to do with a few things. First is values, right? People know that they're growing things in an organic way. There's a certain reason people are doing that. Oftentimes it has to do with care for the environment. Maybe it has to do with not feeling beholden to industrial agriculture suppliers or just loving soil. There's lots of reasons people might be doing that, and they associate those values with the organic certification and
Mm-hmm.
knowing that organic seed, there's an overlap in values there. And especially when you don't actually fully know where your seed is coming from. And there's like this major lack of transparency in the seed industry that can give you a little bit of like assurance that they weren't using pesticides, which is something that you don't want to use either on your farm. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is performance. So a lot of conventional seed is not grown for organic systems,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're grown in contexts where there's a lot of synthetic fertilizer and pesticides. So the seeds might not, or might even forget their abilities to be resistant to pests or diseases, or their ability to get nitrogen from natural sources in the soil as opposed to synthetic sources.
Mm-hmm.
So there is an aspect of performance when it comes to buying organic seed. Now, of course, other farmers were saying, I don't really care that much about the organic certification. I just want it to work well. And that was definitely something that I heard a lot. But I think that when you're talking about working well, there is a reason why organic seed might be working better. But then, of course, the flip side is that there's much more funding for conventional seed than there is for organic seed.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes the conventional seed might actually work better, but it's just because they've put a lot of money into selection and hybridization and all that, whereas the organic seed maybe didn't benefit from a lot of that investment and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that attention that you get from careful breeding. So, there is something to consider there, but I think the response to that is actually then to keep buying organic seed, because then you're like supporting that system. So I do think it's really important to support organic seed, because the folks in that world are doing really, really good and important work when it comes to sustaining the biodiversity that we need for culturally thriving and resilient food systems.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I assume it'll continue to grow because I know that our farm is certified organic, and the last few times I think they've sort of taken the attitude of like, well, yes, we have to try and source organic seed wherever available. And lately they've had this idea like, whatever your percentage of organic seed used was last year, it needs to be higher this year.
Yeah,
And so,
for sure. Yeah. But yeah, there is also like a flip side to it, because I think a lot of the people doing work with growing cultural seeds, for example, the Ujama is doing a lot of this work. We're doing it at the Jewish Seed Project. There's tons of people all over the country doing this. And a lot of times that means growing seed on different farms in different
mhm,
places. And maybe not all of them are certified organic. So a lot of that like really grassroots seed keeping work and culturally seed keeping work is oftentimes not certified and maybe doesn't even want to be certified.
mhm,
So I'm not saying like organic or bust, there's a lot of things that organic can't capture.
yeah.
And yeah, I think the solution is just like keep, investing in thriving seed systems, whether that, in any form that can look like.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And of course, I mean, not all the varieties that most people need to grow are currently available organic, or I know like, that's why we're not 100% organic, because there's some varieties that are important to us that just aren't produced as organic seed yet. So, but yeah, hopefully it'll continue to grow. All right, so we've talked about, and the main focus I feel like for your thesis was seeds and crop selection, but I think you also talked in there about other adaptations growers can make with the soil, tools and equipment, labor, markets, and information and knowledge, and things beyond the farm. Are there any ideas for how growers can increase resiliency on the other areas of the farm that we should talk about?
Definitely. So I think a lot of it comes down to how can you set yourself up in the long term to be able to be adaptable to changing conditions. And this might look different in different sectors of the farm. One thing that's really, really important is labor protections, like informing yourself, what do we do when there's a heat wave?
Mhm.
right? How do we make sure that people have what they need in order to feel safe in a heat wave, or how can we shift our working hours, things like that.
Mhm.
Also, yeah, increasing storage space or, doing infrastructure investments. And of course, this really depends on if you have capital and also if you own your land, right? If you don't own your land, maybe you won't be able to make these investments,
Mhm.
which, that can definitely constrain what you're able to do. I like seeds because that's something that is pretty accessible regardless of your, how much money you have or what your relationship to the land is that you're working on. But some of those infrastructure investments, if you do have money and, long-term access to land, that might be, setting up storage spaces so that you can be more be nimble if you have to harvest a lot quickly. Irrigation is another thing, shifting your irrigation systems, setting up more drip tape. I mean, I think it's things that are kind of maybe intuitive to farmers. Also, another thing that you can do in terms of infrastructure is moving things outside of harm's way. I mean, this is really specific to flooding, right? Like if you're in a floodplain, then trying to move things outside of the floodplain or above the floodplain, that can be really valuable. Yeah. And then also soil is really, really important. So just having healthy soil, and I mean that's important for so many reasons. And one of them definitely is climate change because the more organic matter you have in your soil, the less likely it is to erode
Mhm.
if it's really, really dry or if it's windy and if there's a flood. And also the more able it will be to hold on to water when there's a drought. So
Mhm.
of course, just investing in healthy soil is really important. And then doing things to build your community resilience can also go a really long way, right? Knowing your neighbors, knowing like setting up co-ops with farmers around you, right? If having a lot of the farmers in Western Washington are friends with each other. So, for example, if their tomatoes failed for whatever reason, either because it didn't get hot enough or like the greenhouse broke or something like that, then if you're friends with someone, you could be like, oh, hey, can I get a few tomatoes to fill out this CSA? Just like having those connections can be really, really valuable and important. Also thinking through evacuation plans if you have to and just planning ahead, right? This is especially important if you know that there's wildfires near you. Or if you have animals, that can be really critical. Like,
Mhm.
what are you going to do? How are you going to get them out of harm's way? So those are all of just some of the examples that people shared with me, but I think it just comes down to, okay, how can I like plan for the unexpected almost or try to anticipate what might happen and build flexibility into my system so that I can handle them.
Yeah.
Well, another thing is season extension, of course, because that helps you control, that helps you like give a little bit of control to the weather. So people are definitely building more greenhouses and buying more row cover, things like that, so that you can also say, oh, if it gets really cold, I'm just going to throw some row cover on it. Having greenhouses gives you that little bit of control to say the tomatoes might, yeah, it just gives you that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what you're saying is almost like just to think about what the threats could be as they are changing, like flooding or maybe wildfires are becoming more common, and like I think of that example you were saying about the tractor pad or whatever to keep the equipment out of the water. Like I know a lot of people are also doing like eliminating brush and like thinking about how to make their home farm area more resilient should a wildfire happen in their area. So I guess it's just being aware of the threats. Because yeah, I realize it's very oppressive. Like I was actually out in a number of years back. I was out in Santa Rosa, California. One of the years that there was a really bad wildfire going there. In fact, I was doing farmer interviews and I'd never been that close to a wildfire before. And a lot of my interviews got canceled. I mean, some of which because some of the farmers I had gone out there to talk to were helping their neighbors, but it's there may not be that much you can do about the dark skies. I mean, it was very apocalyptic. I think that's the word you use. It's dark and there was like you can see ash coming down. I guess you can't do much about that, but if you're in the middle of it, but you can try to like people get metal roofs and try to eliminate brush from around their buildings. Like there's a lot of things that you might wish you had done when the fire shows up. there's no way you would have done if you hadn't even thought of it. So
Yeah,
I guess it's
definitely. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, just being aware of the threats. And well, I thought of one thing. Do you know, are there any grants or anything for helping people, like, I guess farmers specifically or in general, do these kind of climate resiliency products or projects, climate resiliency projects, because of like it all takes money. It's like that's one thing. The like plan, come up with a plan is one thing, but then like you got to have the money to execute on it. And I know right
Yeah,
now it's not the best time for grants either, but like, have
that's
you
what I
ever
was going to say.
heard of anything like that? Yeah.
Definitely the USDA had some stuff, but I need to check if it's still going on because there was an attack on our farms, and funding support for farms, especially with anything in the word climate in the grant, from the Trump administration. So we need to look into that. And why don't I get back to you on that?
Yeah, sure.
Maybe state departments of agriculture would be a better place to look at and to see if your state, um yeah, and like check in with your state extension officers because
Yeah.
they might have some resources. My guess is that the funding would be more local rather than federal right now.
I mean, you're probably right about that anyway. It's, well, probably those kind of things probably do are very state to state. So might be worth farmers looking into, seeing or touching base with an extension agent or the kind of person who would know about those kinds of things, because it probably is on a state by state or region by
Yeah.
region kind of basis
Yeah.
if
And
they
you don't
haven't been
even
canceled.
Yeah, the cool thing with a lot of these adaptations is that they're not necessarily only beneficial for climate adaptation, right? So, building more storage space or building another greenhouse could just be good for your farm operation in general because it helps you grow more of or store more of the produce that you're eventually selling. So, it might not even be under the term, it might not be a grant under the term climate resilience. Maybe it's like building infrastructure, and that could be really valuable, right?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. If you can afford to, say, build cold storage or build bigger cold storage, like you were saying, if you're going to have a heat wave that's going to take out your cold sensitive crops, or it might flood, let's get it all into the pack shed. It's the kind of thing that the growers will end up using, whether it's climate related or not, and it just may help, with the weird weather kind of events that we're having more
Yeah.
and more of.
Yeah, and I think the things that you can do without money is increasing your knowledge, right? And just increasing the sources of information that you have, building relationships with your neighbors, with other farmers in your area, with people, with your extension agents. That can help you build resilience. And then, of course, seeds and crop planning, which is what we talked about mostly through this interview. But I do think it's really, really valuable as an accessible form of climate adaptation because you have to buy seeds anyway, and you have to crop plant anyway. So it's not necessarily like a huge additional cost to think about building flexibility into your crop planning.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, soil health practices in general is another good one. It depends, like if you're, for example, using compost or bringing compost, that might be expensive, but you probably want to build up your soil health anyway.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good point. All the stuff will pay off anyway, so
Yeah.
might as well think about it. All right. Well, that was the questions that I had for you, but I feel like we've covered a lot and given people a lot to think about. But is there anything else I should have asked you or that you'd like to say before we let you go?
Just thank you to all the people who are doing everything you can to build local and sustainable food systems. Everybody out there who's doing that is doing really, really good work, and we're all building towards something better. So just want to express some gratitude to you and to all your listeners for doing that very needed work in these times.
Yes, absolutely. Well, yeah, that's very kind of you, and thank you for what you're doing. It's a very important topic that you're tackling for everybody there. Thank you.
My
Um,
pleasure.
is there you want people to find you online or social media or look you up anywhere?
Sure. I do have a website in progress, but it's not live yet. Maybe by the time you make this podcast live, it will be as well. But
Okay.
that'll just be mashavernik.com, and I'll put some of my writing and this podcast there as well. Otherwise, just LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn and post about some of my work there. Also, just Masha Vernik. So yeah, I'll keep you posted on when my website is up.
Oh yeah, and so are you still in school? Are you continuing with this line of research?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I'm doing my PhD. What I just talked about was my master's project, so that finished in summer, and now I'm summer 2025, and now I'm in the early stages of my PhD, and definitely continuing this line of research around climate change and agriculture, and seeds, of course. So, excited to keep asking questions. Yeah, and I also do some consulting projects on the side. So if you ever need or if anyone ever needs like an extra person to, think through something or you write a grant or write a report or anything like that, who's familiar with food systems, I'm also out there trying to do that.
Okay. Great. Well, it's very important work. Thank you for doing it. I appreciate it, and I think our audience will too. So great. Now they know where to find you. So, well, thanks so much for sharing with us. I thought it was interesting, and unfortunately, we're going to be trying to figure this out for the foreseeable future. But I'm glad there are people like you trying to help us figure it out.
For sure. My pleasure. Oh, I'll also say if people want to reach me, you can share my email with your audience as well.
Hmm.
So it's just mvernick@uw.edu, uw.edu.
Okay. Cool.
Or you could
Well.
just put that in the bio or something.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe just in the bio. Yeah.
Yeah. I can throw it in the bio show notes part. So. Um. Okay. Well, thanks so much, Masha. Good luck with the rest of your studies, and let us know if there's exciting developments. This is uh unfortunately we're going to be dealing with this for the foreseeable future, so it's going to be an important topic for the my lifetime as far as I can tell. So best of luck, and if you have a new project or new findings, let us know. Maybe we'll talk again sometime.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah. And thank you so much for bringing all these people together to share about their work. I think it's really awesome what Growing for Market is doing. So I'll be excited to keep uh, focus, like keep learning about what all your guests on the podcast and all the people who are writing in your in your magazine are sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we got, there's a lot of work to do, and it's what do they say about kids? It takes a village. So I feel like we all got to work together and figure this stuff out. So thank you, and thank you for your efforts on that
Yeah,
tip.
definitely. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Masha.
Bye.